They thought she was just a girl from nowhere who got lucky. They thought stripping away her name, her home, her dignity would crush her into silence. When Cassandra Caldwell signed those divorce papers without a single word of protest, her husband and his mother exchanged satisfied smiles, certain they had won. They expected her to disappear into the kind of poverty they imagined she came from. They were wrong. 3 weeks later, the roar of a Gulfstream G650 would shatter the polished calm of New York's most exclusive charity gala. And the woman who stepped out wouldn't be the meek wife they remembered. She would be someone else entirely, and she had come to collect a debt that money could never pay. But to understand why Cassandra signed those papers in absolute silence, you have to go back 6 years, to a small town in Oregon where billionaires don't exist and dreams are measured in tips and rent money. The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Caldwell Estate Library, a rhythmic assault that seemed to mock the quiet devastation unfolding inside. Cassandra sat rigid in the leather armchair, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. She didn't look at the man across from her. Griffin Caldwell, the man she had loved for 5 years, the man currently checking his Patek Philippe watch with the casual impatience of someone waiting for a delayed flight. Standing behind Griffin like a sentinel was his mother. Lorraine Caldwell wore her cruelty the way she wore her vintage Chanel, with pride and precision. Every pearl in her necklace had been chosen to communicate wealth. Every word from her mouth had been sharpened to draw blood. The scratching of pen against paper was the only sound beyond the rain. Lorraine's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Just sign it, Cassandra. Don't drag this out. We all know you're calculating how much alimony you can squeeze from my son, but the prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You leave with what you brought, which, if I recall correctly, was a suitcase full of Walmart clothing and pipe dreams. Cassandra looked up. Her eyes were dry. There were no tears left. She had cried them all 3 nights ago when she found Griffin in their bed with Kinsley Shaw, the daughter of his business partner. Griffin hadn't apologized. He had simply sighed, run his hand through his hair, and told her it was time to be realistic about their compatibility. Her voice came out soft, steady, surprising even herself. I don't want alimony. Griffin scoffed, finally lifting his gaze from his watch. Oh, come on, Cass, don't play the martyr. My lawyer said you might try to fight for the Cape Cod house. It's not happening. She didn't flinch. I don't want the Cape Cod house. I don't want the apartment in the city. I don't want the car. She looked down at the document, Decree of Dissolution of Marriage. It stated clearly that Cassandra Caldwell was to vacate the Greenwich estate immediately. She was to cease using the Caldwell surname socially within 30 days. She was to receive a settlement of $7,500, a final insult carefully calculated by Lorraine to make Cassandra feel like a dismissed housekeeper rather than a wife of 5 years. The family lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He seemed embarrassed to be part of this, his eyes fixed on the mahogany desk rather than meeting anyone's gaze. Make sure you initial the bottom of page 4, Mrs. Caldwell. Cassandra didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen and signed her name. Cassandra Caldwell, the last time she would ever write it. She closed the folder and slid it across the heavy desk with a finality that made the air in the room change, just slightly, though no one seemed to notice. Lorraine snatched the folder immediately, flipping through pages as if expecting Cassandra to have written a curse in invisible ink. When she saw the signatures, a reptilian smile spread across her face, cold satisfaction in every line. Finally, God, Griffin, I told you 5 years ago this day would come. Cross-class marriages never work. She was a waitress from Bend, Oregon, for heaven's sake. A town nobody's ever heard of. You can't turn a stray cat into a show dog. Griffin stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the practiced ease of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. He looked at Cassandra with something that might have been pity mixed with relief, the expression of someone grateful to be escaping a minor inconvenience. Look, Cass, it's for the best. You were never really comfortable in this world. You'll be happier back in yours, you know. The words hung in the air like smoke. My world, Cassandra echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Griffin waved his hand vaguely, dismissively, already mentally moving on to his next appointment. You know, simple, quiet, without the pressure of galas and board meetings and expectations you couldn't meet. I'll have the driver take you to the train station. For the first time since entering the library, Cassandra allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No, I called a cab. It's waiting at the gate. Lorraine laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the book-lined walls. A cab? How fitting. Make sure you don't take any of the silverware on your way out, dear. Cassandra stood slowly. She was wearing a simple, beige trench coat and black slacks, elegant despite the circumstances, though to them she just looked plain, forgettable, exactly what they had always seen. But as she turned to leave, she paused. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with something neither Griffin nor Lorraine could identify. She turned her gaze to Lorraine, and for 2 full seconds, she held the older woman's eyes with a look so cold, so devoid of the submission she had shown for 5 years, that Lorraine actually faltered. Her smile twitched and died. Cassandra's voice was quiet, measured, each word chosen with surgical precision. Goodbye, Lorraine. I hope the price you paid for your son's happiness was worth it. She walked out of the library, her heels clicking on the marble floor of the grand foyer. Her bags were already by the door, 2 modest suitcases containing everything she had brought into this marriage and nothing she had gained. She didn't look back at the sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier, or the life she had tried so hard to build from borrowed materials. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her. She stepped into the rain. The taxi was idling by the wrought iron gates, engine running, wipers fighting the downpour. She got in, soaked to the bone within seconds, water dripping from her hair onto the worn vinyl seat. The driver's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. Where to, miss? Cassandra took a deep breath that felt like the first real breath she had taken in 5 years. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a simple phone. Not the iPhone Griffin paid for, but a basic device she had purchased yesterday in cash. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 6 years. It rang once. A deep voice answered, rough with age and authority, and something that sounded like Montana mountains. Thorn Ranch, who's calling? Cassandra's voice finally broke, just a little, just enough to let the truth slip through. Grandpa, it's me. I'm done. I'm coming home. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of stillness that felt like the eye of a storm. Then a tone of fierce, protective authority that she remembered from childhood, from the days before she tried to be someone else. The voice rumbled like distant thunder. It's about damn time, Cassandra girl. The jet's already at Teterboro. We've been waiting for you. She closed her eyes as the taxi pulled away from the gates, as the Caldwell estate disappeared behind walls and rain and 5 years of mistakes. I need 3 weeks, Grandpa. I have some unfinished business. August Thorne's laugh was low and knowing. Do what you need to do, sweetheart. Welcome home. To understand how Cassandra Holloway became Cassandra Caldwell, and why that marriage was doomed from the first word of the vows, you have to rewind to 6 years earlier, to a different life in a different world, where the air smelled like juniper and high desert dust instead of old money and expensive perfume. Bend, Oregon wasn't the kind of place that appeared in magazines or attracted tourists looking for glamour. It was a town of outdoor enthusiasts and retirees, of modest homes and practical dreams. The High Desert Cafe sat on a quiet corner where the sidewalk cracked from too many harsh winters, where the neon sign flickered occasionally but still managed to spell out open most days of the week. Cassandra was 22 years old when Griffin Caldwell first walked through the door, shaking rain from his overcoat, looking simultaneously annoyed and lost. She was wiping down the counter, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her apron stained with coffee and pie filling. She looked up when the bell chimed and saw a man who clearly didn't belong, his clothes too expensive, his posture too rigid for a place where people came for $3 eggs and conversation. His rental car had broken down half a mile away. He needed coffee and a phone charger and directions to the nearest luxury hotel, which didn't exist in Bend, a fact that seemed to genuinely confuse him. She poured him coffee without asking, set it down with the kind of efficiency born from hundreds of shifts. Cream and sugar are on the table. Phone charger behind the register if you need it. He looked at her like he was seeing something unexpected, though he couldn't quite identify what. Thank you. This is good coffee, actually. She almost smiled. Don't sound so surprised. We know how to make coffee in Oregon. He stayed for an hour, waiting for the tow truck he had called. They talked, carefully at first, then with growing ease. He mentioned he was in Portland on business, something about aerospace contracts and government regulations. She mentioned she played chess, which seemed to surprise him more than good coffee in a small town. His eyes lit up with genuine interest for the first time since walking in. Chess? Really? Not many people play anymore. Her response came without thinking, natural as breathing. My grandfather taught me before he passed. He said chess teaches you to think 3 moves ahead of your opponent, to see patterns they can't see yet, to be patient when everyone else is rushing. Griffin leaned forward slightly, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. You know the Sicilian defense? She met his gaze steadily. I know every major opening and most of the minor ones. The Sicilian's good for black if you're comfortable with asymmetric positions and complex middle games. He stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. Really laughed. The first genuine emotion she had seen from him. I'll be damned. That conversation, that random Wednesday afternoon in October, became the foundation for everything that followed. Griffin came back the next week, ostensibly because he had more business in Portland, but really because something about the waitress who knew chess had gotten under his skin. He came back the week after that. By December, they were taking walks along the Deschutes River, playing chess in Drake Park, while tourists took photos of the mountain views. By spring, Cassandra had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found what she had been looking for when she disappeared from her old life. Someone who saw her as a person, not as a bank account. Someone who wanted her for her mind, her laugh, her quiet strength. She was so sure of this that when Griffin proposed on a hiking trail near Tumalo Falls, with wildflowers blooming and the sun breaking through Oregon clouds, she said yes without hesitation. He held her hands, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. Cass, you make me want to be a better man. I don't need you to be rich or famous or anything other than exactly who you are. I just need you. She believed him. God help her, she believed every word. What Griffin Caldwell didn't know, what nobody in Bend knew, was that the woman serving coffee and living in a studio apartment above the hardware store wasn't exactly who she claimed to be. Cassandra Holloway was a carefully constructed fiction, a name pulled from a middle name and a mother's maiden name. A simple life built deliberately to escape a complicated one. The truth was far stranger and infinitely more valuable. Cassandra Thorne Holloway was the sole heir to Thorne Energy Corporation, a $75 billion empire built on oil, natural gas, and alternative energy investments stretching across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. Her grandfather, August Thorne, was a legend in American business. A man who had started with a single ranch and a dream, who had drilled his first well with borrowed equipment, who had turned luck and ruthlessness and impeccable timing into one of the largest privately held energy companies in the nation. She had grown up in the Thorne Ranch outside Billings, 50,000 acres of rolling grassland and mountain views, in a house that was equal parts Western heritage and modern luxury. She had been groomed from childhood to take over the empire, educated by private tutors and Stanford professors, trained in geology and finance and the brutal mathematics of extraction and profit. She had also learned, painfully and thoroughly, that every friend she made wanted something. Every relationship was transactional. Every smile hid calculation. At 22, after her supposed best friend tried to manipulate her into a business deal that would have destroyed a conservation area Cassandra's grandmother had loved, she made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She told her grandfather she was leaving. Not forever, but for long enough to see if anyone in the world could love Cassandra the person instead of Thorne the fortune. August Thorne, old and wise and heartbroken by his granddaughter's isolation, had made her a promise. "You go live your life, sweetheart. Find what you're looking for. But when you're ready to come home, you call me. No questions asked, no judgment given. You'll always have a place here." She had taken that promise and built a new life from scratch. Simple work, honest pay, a studio apartment with thrift store furniture, friends who knew nothing about oil leases or stockholder meetings. And eventually, Griffin Caldwell, who seemed to want nothing from her except her company and conversation. She had been so certain she had finally escaped the cage of wealth. She realized her mistake on their wedding day, when Lorraine Caldwell refused to attend the small ceremony in Bend, when Griffin's father Gerard made apologetic excuses about his wife's health, when she saw the discomfort in Griffin's eyes every time he introduced her to his East Coast friends. But by then, she loved him, or she loved who she thought he was, and she convinced herself it would get better once they were truly married, once she proved herself worthy of the Caldwell name. The first year was almost happy. They lived in a modest apartment in Manhattan, away from the Greenwich estate, away from Lorraine's influence. Griffin worked long hours at Caldwell Aerospace, the family company that manufactured components for commercial and military aircraft. Cassandra managed their home, took online courses in art history and literature, tried to find purpose in the margins of his busy life. Then Gerard Caldwell died suddenly of a heart attack, collapsing in his office during a conference call about falling profit margins and increased competition. Griffin inherited the company at 31, younger than anyone had expected, unprepared despite decades of grooming. And Lorraine moved in to help. Temporarily, she said, just until Griffin found his footing. That was 2 years ago. Temporary became permanent. Help became control. The changes started small. Lorraine took over household management, claiming Cassandra didn't understand the needs of a CEO's home. She reorganized the cleaning schedule, the meal planning, the social calendar. When Cassandra tried to object, Lorraine smiled coldly and said, "Dear, you're from Oregon. You don't understand how things work in Connecticut society." Then came the budget restrictions. Cassandra had to ask for money for groceries, for clothing, for anything beyond basic necessities. Lorraine reviewed every request with theatrical skepticism. $150 for groceries? Cassandra stood in the kitchen, receipt in hand, trying to explain that organic produce and quality meat cost more than Lorraine seemed to think. Lorraine barely looked up from her tablet. $80 should be more than sufficient for a week's meals. Learn to shop more carefully. The social humiliations were worse. At dinner parties, Lorraine introduced Cassandra as Griffin's little charity project, or the girl my son rescued from waitressing. She corrected Cassandra's grammar in front of guests, asked pointed questions about her limited education, made jokes about small-town ignorance that everyone laughed at because Lorraine Caldwell's favor was worth more than kindness to a nobody from Oregon. Griffin never defended her, not once. He would touch her arm afterward, apologetic but resigned. "Mother means well, Cass. She's just protective. She'll come around eventually." But Lorraine never came around. If anything, she became bolder. The professional humiliations came next. Cassandra was banned from business meetings and board dinners. "You wouldn't understand the conversation, dear," Lorraine explained sweetly. "These are complex aerospace industry matters. Why don't you focus on making sure the house is properly managed?" Once, only once, Cassandra made the mistake of offering a suggestion about company strategy. She had been reading the quarterly reports Griffin left on his desk, noticed a pattern in the supply chain delays, saw an opportunity to diversify suppliers and reduce dependency on a single contractor in Southeast Asia. She mentioned it casually over dinner, thinking Griffin might find it interesting. Lorraine set down her fork with exaggerated care. The silence that followed was arctic. My dear child, Griffin has an MBA from Wharton. He's been trained since birth to run this company. You served pancakes. Perhaps you should stick to things you actually understand, like folding napkins and not embarrassing yourself. Griffin said nothing. He cut his steak and changed the subject to a golf game he had scheduled for the weekend. That was the moment Cassandra realized the truth she had been avoiding. Griffin didn't want a partner. He wanted someone small enough to make him feel big, someone grateful enough to never question him, someone who would play the role of rescued waif and never demand more. She stopped offering suggestions. She stopped attending events unless absolutely required. She made herself smaller and quieter and more invisible, hoping that if she took up less space, caused less friction, he might remember why he had loved her in the first place. But Griffin was changing too, shaped by his mother's constant pressure and the stress of running a company he wasn't fully prepared to lead. He worked later hours. He drank more. He stopped asking about her day, stopped playing chess with her on Sunday mornings, stopped looking at her like she was someone interesting. 6 months ago, he began staying overnight in the city more frequently, claiming early meetings and late negotiations. Cassandra suspected the truth, but couldn't quite force herself to confront it. Confrontation would mean acknowledging that her great experiment had failed, that she had given up her identity and her inheritance for a man who saw her as an accessory rather than an equal. Then came the preliminary guarantee agreement. Griffin mentioned it casually over breakfast 3 days before Cassandra discovered his affair. He was signing a financial guarantee for Shaw Defense, a military contractor owned by his business partner's family. The guarantee would protect a $450 million loan Shaw Defense had taken to expand their Middle East operations. Cassandra, who still read the financial papers even though no one asked her opinion anymore, recognized the name. Shaw Defense was overextended, bleeding cash from failed contracts and cost overruns. The Middle East expansion was a desperate gamble, not a sound investment. She tried to warn him, carefully, gently, knowing how he reacted to her suggestions now. Griffin, are you sure about the Shaw guarantee? Their fundamentals look shaky. If those contracts fall through, he cut her off without looking up from his phone. Cass, stick to things you know, okay? Leave the business to me. Lorraine, sipping her tea at the end of the table, added her own poison. My son has a Wharton MBA, dear. You serve pancakes in Oregon. I think we can trust his judgment over yours. That night, Griffin signed the guarantee. 3 days later, Cassandra came home early from a doctor's appointment and found Griffin in their bedroom with Kinsley Shaw, the 27-year-old daughter of the company he had just guaranteed $500 million to protect. The betrayal was complete. Professional and personal, financial and emotional, all tangled together in a way that made it impossible to separate which cut deeper. She had stood in the doorway, watching them scramble to cover themselves, watching Griffin's face cycle through shock and guilt, and finally settle on defensive annoyance. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg forgiveness. He ran his hand through his hair, sighed like she was the inconvenience, and said, "We need to be realistic about our compatibility, Cass. This isn't working. Kinsley understands this world. She understands the pressure I'm under. You're just too simple for this life." Those words, that casual dismissal, that utter lack of remorse, flipped a switch inside Cassandra that she hadn't known existed. She looked at Griffin, really looked at him for the first time in months, and saw not the man who had proposed by Tumalo Falls, but a weak man in an expensive suit, a man who blamed everyone else for his failures, a man who let his mother dictate his life because making his own decisions was too frightening. Her voice came out calm, almost pleasant. "I want a divorce." Griffin's relief was visible, immediate, insulting. I think that's for the best. And so 3 days later, she sat in the library and signed papers that stripped her of everything she had tried to build. She let them think they had won. She let Lorraine gloat about getting the stray cat out of the house. She let Griffin believe she would disappear into poverty and obscurity. She didn't tell them that every word, every insult, every casual cruelty had been stored away in a mind trained since childhood to think in terms of strategy and leverage and long-term planning. She didn't tell them that the phone call she made from the taxi was to one of the most powerful men in American business. She didn't tell them that Cassandra Holloway, the waitress from Bend, was about to cease existing altogether. In her place, someone far more dangerous was coming home. The drive from Greenwich to Teterboro Airport took 47 minutes in traffic. Cassandra watched Connecticut slide past the rain-streaked window, million-dollar homes giving way to commercial districts, wealth giving way to work. The taxi driver didn't try to make conversation, for which she was grateful. She needed the silence to prepare for what came next. At Teterboro, she paid cash and asked the driver to take her bags to the private aviation terminal. He looked at her rain-soaked coat and modest suitcases with obvious skepticism, clearly wondering if she knew where she was going. Private aviation wasn't for people who took cabs from Greenwich. She walked into the terminal like she owned it, because in a way, she did. Thorn Energy Corporation maintained a permanent hangar here, one of 4 the company kept at major airports across the country. The woman at the desk looked up, started to ask if she could help, then stopped mid-sentence as recognition dawned. The woman's face went pale. "Miss Thorne, we've been expecting you. Your aircraft is ready. The crew is standing by." Cassandra nodded once, not trusting her voice yet. 6 years of pretending to be someone else was crumbling with every step, and she wasn't sure whether she was walking toward freedom or simply trading one cage for another. The Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming in the hangar, $70 million of engineering and luxury painted in titanium gray with subtle gold accents. On the tail, visible even from a distance, was the Thorn Energy logo, a stylized mountain peak with a snake coiled around its base, symbols of Montana's wild heritage. As she approached, the stairs lowered. A man appeared at the top, silhouetted against the interior light. Tall and lean and impossibly distinguished, in his western-cut suit, silver hair swept back from a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from the Rockies themselves. August Thorne descended the stairs slowly, his custom walking stick clicking against metal, his eyes never leaving his granddaughter's face. He reached the tarmac and stopped 3 feet away, studying her with the intensity of someone who understood value and recognized loss. His voice was gravel and honey and home. "You look like hell, Cassandra girl." Something inside her broke just a little. "I feel worse, Grandpa." He opened his arms, and she stepped into them, and for the first time in 5 years she felt safe. He smelled like Montana sage and expensive whiskey, like the ranch house library where he had taught her to play chess, like everything she had given up to chase a dream that turned out to be an illusion. They stood like that for a long moment while rain pattered on the hangar roof, and the G650's engines hummed with readiness. Finally, August pulled back, holding her at arm's length, his sharp eyes cataloging every change the years had carved into her. "You ready to come home?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I need 3 weeks, Grandpa. There's something I have to do first." His eyes narrowed, the look of a man who had built an empire by reading people and situations with ruthless accuracy. "This about the boy who broke your heart. This about the man who thought he could break me." August Thorne's smile was slow and dangerous, a predator recognizing a predator. "Tell me what you need." They flew west through the night, the G650 eating distance at 560 miles per hour. Cassandra sat in the leather captain's chair, her grandfather across from her, a chessboard between them just like old times, but neither of them moved pieces. Instead, she talked, laying out 5 years of marriage and mistakes and careful observation. She explained about Caldwell Aerospace and Shaw Defense, about the merger announcement planned for 3 weeks from now at the Empire Charity Gala, New York's most exclusive annual event, about the financial guarantee Griffin had signed, tying his company's fate to a sinking ship. August listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, occasionally sipping from a glass of scotch that looked like liquid gold in the cabin light. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a tablet and began making notes with brutal efficiency. Shaw Defense owes money to First Continental Bank of Denver. We own 70% of that bank, have for 15 years. Cassandra felt something cold and fierce settle in her chest. So we could call in their debt. We could, if there's a technical default, which, given how overextended they are, won't be hard to engineer. He looked up, meeting her eyes. But you need to understand what you're asking for, Cassandra. This isn't just revenge. This is warfare. You pull this trigger, you destroy lives. Maybe not just the ones who deserve it. She thought about Lorraine's smile when she signed the papers, about Griffin's relief at being rid of his inconvenient wife, about 5 years of being treated like she was stupid and worthless and small. Her voice was steady. I'm not asking you to destroy them, Grandpa. I'm asking you to help me make them choose. Griffin can keep his company if he's willing to pay the price for thinking I was disposable. August studied her for a long moment, then smiled with something like pride. You've grown up, granddaughter. Your grandmother would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. When do we start? First, I need information. Everything you can get me on Caldwell Aerospace, Shaw Defense, and every financial connection between them. Second, I need our best lawyers preparing documentation. And third, she paused, thinking about a promise she had made to herself in the taxi. Third, I need you to trust me to run this play my way. August raised his glass. You're August Thorne's granddaughter. You were running plays before you could walk. Welcome back to the game, Cassandra. They landed at the ranch before dawn. Montana greeted her with cold air and infinite stars, the smell of grass and distance, the silence that only exists far from cities and crowds and people who measure worth in yacht length. The main house rose against the mountains, equal parts rustic and modern, all stone and glass and timber harvested from Thornland. Lights burned in the windows despite the hour. Staff had been waiting. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered. The great room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley. The stone fireplace large enough to stand in. The collection of Western art and Remington bronzes. Priceless pieces displayed with casual confidence. The library where August had taught her chess, where she had spent countless hours learning to think like an opponent, to see 3 moves ahead. She stood in the doorway of that library now, looking at the board that was always set up, always waiting for the next game. August's voice came from behind her. You were always the best player I ever faced. Better than me, if I'm honest. You see patterns others miss. She touched one of the ivory pawns, remembering. I stopped playing when I left. It felt like cheating somehow, using strategy in real life. Strategy is real life, granddaughter. The people who pretend otherwise are the ones who get played. He moved to stand beside her. The question is, are you ready to play again? She picked up the pawn, felt its weight, remembered how even the smallest piece could change everything if it reached the other side of the board. What's our first move? August pulled out his phone, pulled up a file, handed it to her. While you were flying, I had our intelligence team do a preliminary workup. Shaw Defense missed a debt covenant requirement last month. Small thing, technical violation, but enough to trigger a call provision if we want to invoke it. Cassandra scrolled through the document, her Stanford education flooding back. The financial literacy she had pretended not to have for 5 years suddenly sharp and ruthless. If we call the debt, they can't pay. They're too overextended. The Middle East contracts are underwater. They'd have 30 days to find $450 million or face foreclosure. which means they'd turn to Griffin's guarantee, which means Caldwell Aerospace would be on the hook for their failure. She looked up, saw the chess game 3 moves ahead. Unless someone offers to buy the debt, restructure it, give Shaw a way out that doesn't destroy Griffin's company. August's smile was all teeth. Now you're thinking like a Thorne. Over the next 2 weeks, Cassandra Thorne Holloway assembled the architecture of Griffin Caldwell's comeuppance with the precision of an engineer and the patience of a grandmaster. She flew to New York twice, staying in anonymous hotels, meeting with lawyers in conference rooms that were swept for listening devices. She reviewed contracts and financial statements until her eyes burned. She made phone calls to investment bankers who owed her grandfather favors, to SEC contacts who could confirm certain suspicions, to industry experts who could verify the precarious state of Shaw Defense's operations. And she made one other call, to a number she had kept folded in her wallet for 7 years, to a man she had met once at a chess tournament and never forgotten. The phone rang 3 times before a deep voice answered, cautious and controlled. "This number isn't public. Who is this?" Cassandra took a breath. "Declan Hawthorne. This is Cassandra Thorne. We met 7 years ago at the U.S. Chess Championship in Las Vegas. We played to a draw in the finals." Silence on the line, heavy with surprise. Then his voice came back, different now, almost wondering. "Cassandra, you disappeared. I looked for you for years. Went back to that tournament venue 5 times hoping you'd show up again." Something in her chest tightened at the admission, but she pushed past it. This wasn't about old connections or roads not taken. "I need information, Declan, on Shaw Defense. I know you specialize in corporate restructuring. I know you've probably looked at them." His tone shifted immediately, professional instinct overriding personal curiosity. "I have. They're a mess. Why are you asking?" "Because I'm about to buy their debt, and I need to make sure there aren't any bombs hidden in the structure that could blow back on me." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new respect. "You're the Thorne heir. I should have figured that out years ago. You played like someone trained from birth. Will you help me? What's in it for me?" She smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Dinner. When this is over, I choose the restaurant." His laugh was low and genuine. "You've got yourself a consultant, Cassandra Thorne. Give me 3 days. I'll send you everything you need to know." He was as good as his word. 3 days later, a secure file arrived with documentation that made Cassandra's blood run cold. Shaw Defense wasn't just overextended. They had shell companies registered in Delaware, payments to subcontractors that looked suspiciously like bribes, potential violations of federal contracting regulations that could trigger criminal investigations if the right people started looking. If Thorne Energy bought Shaw Defense as currently structured, they would be buying a liability that could destroy their reputation and trigger regulatory action against the entire company. She called Declan back immediately. "This is worse than you said. That's why I'm sending you a second file, the clean version. If you restructure the subsidiaries, isolate the toxic assets in a separate entity that gets liquidated, and bring in federal compliance auditors proactively, you can buy Shaw Defense without buying their criminal liability." How long would that take? If you've got top-tier lawyers and unlimited resources, 2 weeks, maybe 3. She had both. "Send me the restructuring plan." And Declan? "Yeah? Thank you. This would have destroyed me if I'd gone in blind." His voice softened, became something other than purely professional. "I'm not going to let you get destroyed, Cassandra. I've been looking for you too long to lose you now." She ended the call before she could respond to that, before she could think about what it meant or whether she was ready for complications that didn't involve revenge and empire building. The 3rd week arrived with the inevitability of a train bearing down on a car stalled on the tracks. The Empire Charity Gala was scheduled for Saturday night at Manhattan's Pier 57, an old shipping terminal converted into the most exclusive event space in New York. The theme was "Innovation Takes Flight," chosen specifically to showcase Caldwell Aerospace's prominence in the industry. Griffin would announce his merger with Shaw Defense there, in front of 600 of New York's most powerful people, with national media coverage and Pentagon officials in attendance. It was supposed to be his coronation, the moment he stepped out of his father's shadow and proved himself worthy of the Caldwell name. Instead, it would become the night his world ended. Cassandra spent the final days preparing with military precision. She had her hair cut in style by the same Manhattan salon her grandmother had used, layers that softened her face while adding sophistication. She had a dress made, midnight black silk that moved like water and cost more than Griffin had paid her in settlement. She had jewelry pulled from the Thorne family vault, including the Montana Yogo sapphire necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. $15 million of rare blue stones that no amount of money could buy because they simply didn't exist anywhere else in the world. And she had her grandfather arrange one final critical detail. Thorne Energy Corporation, which maintained a low profile and rarely attended East Coast social events, would add a representative to the Empire Gala guest list. The representative would arrive by private aircraft. The representative would be Cassandra Thorne Holloway, sole heir to the Thorne fortune, returning to public life for the first time in 6 years. Griffin and Lorraine would receive notification of the addition to the guest list, but not the name of the representative. Just Thorne Energy Corporation, Executive Delegation. On Friday afternoon, Cassandra stood in her childhood bedroom at the ranch, looking at herself in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was, and wasn't, the girl who had left 6 years ago. She looked harder now, sharper, like something forged in fire and pressure. August appeared in the doorway, distinguished in his western-cut tuxedo, a Stetson hat in his hands. "You ready for this, granddaughter?" She adjusted the sapphire necklace, watched the stones catch the light. "I've been ready since I signed those papers." "This isn't just about making him hurt, Cassandra. You understand that, right? Once you step onto that stage, you're claiming your place in the world. There's no hiding after this. No going back to anonymous life in Oregon. You'll be Cassandra Thorne forever." She met his eyes in the mirror. Good, because Cassandra Holloway never really existed anyway. She was just a story I told myself about who I wanted to be. It's time to be who I actually am. He nodded slowly, pride evident in every line of his weathered face. "Then let's go remind New York why the Thorne name commands respect." They flew east through Saturday afternoon, the G650 racing toward confrontation and closure, and a reckoning that was 6 years and 5,000 miles and one broken heart in the making. Cassandra sat by the window, watching America slide past below, farmland and cities and rivers that had no idea what was about to happen in Manhattan. She thought about Griffin, probably getting ready in Greenwich, adjusting his bow tie, checking his watch, anticipating his triumph. She thought about Lorraine, probably smiling that reptilian smile, believing she had successfully removed the stain of a cross-class marriage from her family legacy. She thought about Kinsley Shaw, probably admiring her engagement ring, planning a wedding that would never happen. None of them knew. None of them suspected. None of them had bothered to actually know who Cassandra Holloway was beneath the quiet exterior and careful smiles. They were about to learn. As the Manhattan skyline came into view, glittering in the early evening light like a promise or a threat, August raised his glass of whiskey. His voice was Montana steel, wrapped in Western courtesy. "To settling accounts." Cassandra touched her glass to his. "To reminding people that silence doesn't mean weakness. To showing your husband exactly what he threw away." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Ex-husband, and he's about to understand the difference between charity and mercy. One you give because you're generous, the other you withhold because you're strong." The G650 began its descent into Teterboro. Below, New York sparkled with lights and possibilities, and 600 powerful people who had no idea the night they expected was about to become the night they would never forget. Cassandra Thorne was coming home, and she was bringing a reckoning with her. The Manhattan Pier 57 event space had been transformed into something between an airplane hangar and a palace. Massive screens displayed rotating images of jets in flight, satellites orbiting Earth, the Caldwell Aerospace logo rendered in tasteful gold and silver. 600 of New York's most influential people mingled beneath vaulted ceilings, their combined net worth capable of buying small nations, their power capable of reshaping industries with a single phone call. Griffin Caldwell stood near the center of the room, accepting congratulations from a Pentagon procurement official, his confidence visible in every gesture. The merger announcement was scheduled for 9 o'clock, still 90 minutes away, but already the energy in the room felt like vindication. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. His hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the assurance of a man who believed he had finally proven himself worthy of his father's legacy. Beside him, Kinsley Shaw displayed her 5-carat engagement ring with practiced casualness, tilting her hand just enough to catch the light whenever someone approached. She wore red Valentino, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style that had required 3 hours in a celebrity stylist. She touched Griffin's arm possessively every few minutes, marking territory, claiming victory. Near the bar, Lorraine Caldwell held court with a group of society matrons, her vintage Chanel suit perfectly pressed, her pearl necklace a family heirloom worth $500,000. She radiated satisfaction like heat from asphalt, finally seeing her son paired with someone appropriate, someone who understood breeding and legacy and the importance of maintaining standards. Her voice carried across the elegant space, pitched just loud enough for nearby conversations to pause. Of course, Griffin's first marriage was an unfortunate learning experience, but we all make mistakes when we're young. The important thing is he corrected course before there were children or other complications. Kinsley is exactly the kind of partner a man in his position needs. The women around her murmured agreement, their judgment swift and certain. First marriages to unsuitable women were forgivable. Everyone knew someone who had made that mistake. Griffin caught his mother's eye across the room and smiled. Everything was finally aligned. The merger would be announced tonight. The engagement would be formalized publicly next month. Caldwell Aerospace would become the dominant player in their sector, partnered with Shaw Defense's military contracts and political connections. His mother would finally stop looking at him with that mixture of disappointment and concern that had haunted him since his father's death. And Cassandra, that quiet mistake from Oregon, was gone, disappeared back to whatever small life she came from, exactly as she should have. He checked his Patek Philippe, 8:17. 43 minutes until his speech. 43 minutes until he stepped fully into the legacy his father had built and his mother had protected. He had no idea that in exactly 4 minutes, the architecture of his future would begin collapsing like a building with its foundation removed. The first whisper started near the entrance, where a cluster of hedge fund managers had been discussing market volatility. One of them received a text message and frowned, showing his screen to the man beside him. That man pulled out his own phone, typed something quickly, then looked up with an expression of confusion mixed with intrigue. The whisper spread like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Guest list. Amendment. Thorne Energy Corporation. Here tonight. A venture capitalist who specialized in energy investments turned to her companion, voice low but urgent. Thorne Energy never comes to East Coast events. August Thorne hasn't been to New York in 15 years. Why would they add themselves to the guest list an hour before the gala? Her companion, a former Secretary of Energy who now consulted for multiple Fortune 500 companies, pulled out reading glasses and studied something on his tablet. The notification just says, Executive Delegation, no names. But if August Thorne is actually coming, this becomes a very different evening. The man controls more energy infrastructure than some countries. The whispers reached Griffin as he was accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter. A Bloomberg reporter he vaguely recognized approached with the predatory friendliness of someone smelling a story. The reporter's smile was all professional teeth. Griffin, any comment on the Thorn Energy addition to tonight's guest list? Is there a connection between their attendance and your merger announcement? Griffin's hand tightened on the champagne flute, confusion flickering across his carefully maintained expression. Thorn Energy? I'm not familiar with that company. The reporter's eyebrows rose, surprise genuine. Thorn Energy Corporation, Montana-based, $75 billion in assets, one of the largest privately held energy companies in America. They just added themselves to the guest list. I assume there might be some business connection, given the timing. Something cold touched Griffin's spine, a sensation he couldn't quite identify. Montana, energy, but there was no logical connection to Caldwell Aerospace or Shaw Defense. The industries didn't overlap. The geographies didn't align. It had to be coincidence. He forced a confident smile. I'm sure Mr. Thorne's attendance is simply evidence of the gala's prestige. We're honored to have such distinguished guests. The reporter made a note, unconvinced but willing to move on for now. Griffin watched him go, then turned to find Kinsley. She was near the dessert display, laughing with the wife of a senator, completely at ease in a world she had been born into. Before he could reach her, Lorraine materialized at his elbow, her face tight with something that might have been concern. Her fingers gripped his arm with surprising strength. Griffin, who authorized adding Thorn Energy to the guest list? He kept his voice level, refusing to show uncertainty in public. I have no idea, Mother. The event coordinators handle those details. Why does it matter? Lorraine's eyes scanned the room like a hawk, searching for prey. Because August Thorne doesn't do anything without purpose. If he's coming to New York, to this event specifically, there's a reason. And I want to know what it is before your announcement. Griffin pulled out his phone, typed a quick message to his executive assistant. The response came back within 30 seconds. The addition had been made through official channels, approved by the Gala's organizing committee, payment processed through Thorn Energy's accounting department. Everything legitimate, everything proper. Nothing that explained why a Montana energy baron would suddenly decide to attend a New York aerospace industry event. The cold feeling in Griffin's spine intensified. At 8:21, the music stopped. The elegant string quartet that had been providing background ambiance simply ceased mid-phrase, as if someone had cut their power. Conversations throughout the space faltered, people turning to look for the cause of the disruption. Then came the sound that would haunt Griffin Caldwell for the rest of his life. The deep, powerful whine of jet engines, close and getting closer. Not overhead where aircraft sounds belonged, but horizontal, at ground level. The sound grew until it filled the converted warehouse space, until champagne flutes rattled on their trays and conversation stopped entirely. The massive curtains at the back of the venue, the ones that separated the event space from the private aircraft tarmac outside, began to part. Heavy velvet pulled back by automated systems, revealing floor-to-ceiling windows, and beyond them, the reason for the sound. 40 yards from the windows, on the private tarmac reserved for the Gala's most exclusive guests, sat a Gulfstream G650 in titanium gray with gold accents. The engines were still spinning down, their whine fading to a hum. The aircraft's presence was impossible to ignore, positioned with theatrical precision to be visible from inside the event space. On the tail, rendered in gold leaf that caught the tarmac floodlights, was a symbol that made half the room pull out their phones. A stylized mountain peak with a coiled snake, the unmistakable logo of Thorn Energy Corporation. Someone near the bar breathed out a single word. Jesus. The collective gasp that went through the room was audible. 600 powerful people simultaneously realizing they were about to witness something unprecedented. Phones appeared like magic, cameras activating, Social media posts beginning before anyone even emerged from the aircraft. Griffin stood frozen, champagne forgotten in his hand. Montana. Thorn. Energy. The pieces still didn't connect. There was no reason for this, no business logic, no explanation that made sense. Lorraine's fingers dug into his arm hard enough to bruise. Who is it? Who's on that plane? Before Griffin could answer, before he could even process the question, the aircraft door opened and stairs extended smoothly to the tarmac. Two security personnel in impeccable suits descended first, their movements professional and precise. They took positions at the base of the stairs, not aggressive but unmistakably present, authority radiating from their posture. Then came August Thorne himself. He appeared at the top of the stairs like something from another era, tall and lean despite his 77 years, wearing a Western-cut tuxedo that somehow managed to be both traditional and commanding. His silver hair was swept back from a face that looked carved from Montana granite, weathered by decades of wind and sun and ruthless business decisions. He carried a walking stick made from polished hardwood, its top carved into the shape of a wolf's head. The room collectively inhaled. August Thorne was a legend, a myth, a man who appeared in business textbooks but rarely in person at events like this. His presence alone was enough to shift power dynamics and redirect attention. But he wasn't alone. August paused at the top of the stairs, then extended his hand back toward the aircraft's interior. A moment passed, pregnant with anticipation. Then a woman emerged into the floodlights. Griffin's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor and shattered, crystal exploding across marble, the sound lost in the absolute silence that had gripped the room. The woman descending the aircraft stairs bore no resemblance to the meek wife he had divorced 3 weeks ago. She wore black silk that moved like liquid shadow, cut to emphasize elegance rather than reveal, sophisticated in a way that made every other dress in the room look slightly wrong. Her hair fell in dark waves instead of the tight bun she had always worn, framing a face that seemed sharper somehow, like a mask had been removed to reveal the structure beneath. But it was the necklace that made identification certain, that transformed confusion into shock. Montana Yogo sapphires, the rarest blue stones in existence. $15 million of jewelry that couldn't be bought because pieces like it simply didn't exist for sale. Only one family in America possessed sapphires of that quality and quantity. She walked across the tarmac with the kind of confidence that comes from birthright rather than practice, her posture that of someone who had never doubted her right to occupy space. The red carpet leading from the tarmac into the event space might as well have been rolled out specifically for her arrival. Kinsley's voice came out strangled, disbelieving. That can't be, but it was. August Thorne's voice carried across the tarmac and through the open space, amplified by the architectural acoustics, pitched to reach every corner of the stunned room. "Shall we, Cassandra?" The woman on his arm met the eyes of everyone watching with perfect calm, her voice clear and steady and utterly transformed from the soft-spoken woman who had served coffee in Oregon and endured humiliation in Connecticut. "Yes, grandfather. Let's say hello to my ex-husband." The crowd parted automatically as they entered, 600 powerful people moving aside through pure instinct, responding to a hierarchy they understood on a cellular level. This wasn't money they had. This was dynasty, legacy, the kind of generational wealth and power that made even billionaires feel small. Griffin couldn't move. His brain refused to process what his eyes were showing him. Cassandra, quiet Cassandra from Bend, walking into the Empire Gala on August Thorne's arm, wearing jewelry worth more than Griffin's entire net worth, carrying herself like royalty because apparently, in a very real sense, she was. She stopped 15 feet away from where Griffin stood frozen. Kinsley had moved to grip his arm, her engagement ring suddenly looking cheap and desperate. Lorraine stood to Griffin's left, her face cycling through shock, to denial, to something approaching horror. August Thorne's eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone used to evaluating worth and finding it wanting. His gaze settled on Griffin with the kind of attention a biologist might give an interesting specimen. Griffin's voice came out wrong, too high, stripped of the confidence he had carried all evening. Cassandra, what? How? How do you know August Thorne? The woman who had been his wife looked at him with eyes that held no warmth, no familiarity, no trace of the person he thought he had known. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge of cold amusement that he had never heard before, had never imagined she possessed. I don't just know him, Griffin. I am a Thorne, Cassandra Thorne Holloway, sole heir to Thorne Energy Corporation. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Around them, phones captured every second, broadcasting to social media and news outlets, turning a private humiliation into a public spectacle that would be analyzed and discussed for years. Lorraine stepped forward, her face flushed, finger pointing at Cassandra with the kind of aggressive certainty that came from a lifetime of being right through sheer force of will. Impossible. This is a trick. She's from Bend, Oregon. She doesn't know which fork to use for salad. This is fraud. Some kind of elaborate con to embarrass us. August Thorne's voice went from conversational to deadly without changing volume, the shift terrifying in its subtlety. If that finger points at my granddaughter one more time, madam, I will have it broken. The security personnel who had descended from the aircraft took a single, synchronized step forward. It wasn't threatening. It was simply a statement of capability and willingness. Lorraine's hand dropped to her side, her face going pale beneath expensive makeup. Around them, the crowd had pressed closer, drawn by spectacle and scandal, phone cameras recording every moment of the Caldwell family's destruction. Kinsley found her voice, shrill with panic and disbelief. But the Thorne heir disappeared years ago. Everyone said she had a mental breakdown, that she couldn't handle the pressure of the family business. Cassandra's smile was cold and precise as a scalpel. I didn't have a breakdown, Kinsley. I had a realization. I was tired of a world where people were valued for their bank accounts rather than their character. I wanted to see if anyone could love me for who I was instead of what I owned. So I walked away from $75 billion, changed my name, worked as a waitress, lived in a studio apartment. She turned her gaze back to Griffin, and the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. When I met you, Griffin, I thought I'd found it. I thought you were someone who loved Cassandra the person, the woman who liked chess and bad coffee and quiet Sunday mornings. I thought you saw me as worthy of respect. Griffin reached toward her, his hands shaking, everything he thought he knew about reality crumbling around him. I did. Cass, I did love you. Her hand came up, stopping him without physical contact. No, you loved the idea of rescuing someone. You loved feeling superior. But the moment I became inconvenient, the moment your mother decided I didn't fit your image, you discarded me like garbage. You cheated on me in our bed, in the bed I slept in, trusting you. The crowd around them had gone silent, 600 people holding their collective breath, watching a reckoning unfold in real time. Lorraine recovered enough to launch a counterattack, her voice sharp with desperate authority. So you have a wealthy grandfather. Congratulations. It changes nothing. Griffin is merging with Shaw Defense tonight. We're building an empire that even the Thornes will have to acknowledge. You're just a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin his moment. Go back to your ranch, darling. This is New York. We don't care about your Montana oil money. Cassandra's smile widened, became something predatory and satisfied, like a chess player who had just seen their opponent make the exact wrong move. The merger with Shaw Defense. Yes, let's talk about that, shall we? She turned to August, who produced a black leather portfolio with the casual efficiency of someone who had orchestrated this moment down to the second. Cassandra opened it, pulled out financial documents, her movements deliberate and theatrical. The Bloomberg reporter from earlier had pushed to the front of the crowd, camera operator beside him, professional instincts recognizing that something massive was unfolding. Cassandra acknowledged him with a slight nod, then addressed the room as a whole. Her voice projected with the kind of natural authority that came from a lifetime of being groomed to command boardrooms. When I signed my divorce papers 3 weeks ago, I made a phone call. I told my grandfather I was ready to come home, ready to take my place in the family business. Do you know what the first thing I did was? She paused, letting the question hang, letting 600 people lean forward in anticipation. I looked into the finances of Shaw Defense, the company Griffin is merging with tonight, the company whose CEO's daughter is currently wearing Griffin's engagement ring. Kinsley's face drained of color. Griffin's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Cassandra continued, relentless. What I found was fascinating. Shaw Defense borrowed heavily to expand their Middle East operations. $800 million to be precise. Those contracts fell through. The expansion failed. They're hemorrhaging cash, bleeding from cost overruns and canceled agreements. They're desperate for this merger because they need Griffin's cash reserves to cover their debt payments. She pulled another document from the portfolio. The debt was held by First Continental Bank of Denver, a solid institution, very reputable. Her pause was perfectly timed, theatrical in the best sense. Which Thorn Energy Corporation acquired 70% controlling interest in approximately 3 days ago. The implications hit the room like a physical wave. Conversations erupted, phone calls being made, financial analysts already calculating what this meant. Cassandra's voice cut through the noise. That means I own Shaw Defense's debt. I own their mortgages. I own their assets. And as of this morning, I invoked a technical covenant violation and called the loans due immediately. Kinsley made a sound like a wounded animal. Griffin's face had gone from pale to gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate-controlled venue. Lorraine's voice came out strangled. You can't do that. There are grace periods, legal procedures. Cassandra looked at her with something like pity. There were grace periods, but Shaw Defense missed a filing requirement last month. A small thing, technical, but sufficient to trigger immediate repayment clauses. My lawyers are very thorough. You know that, Lorraine. They drafted my prenuptial agreement. The reminder was a twist of the knife, intentional and cruel. Griffin found his voice, though it came out weak and desperate. But that means Shaw Defense is bankrupt. They can't pay $800 million in 30 days. Cassandra's expression didn't change. Exactly. There is no merger, Griffin. You're about to announce a partnership with a corpse. The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions. Financial analysts on phones. The Pentagon official who had been congratulating Griffin earlier, now backing away like Griffin carried a contagious disease. But Cassandra wasn't finished. She produced one more document, this one clearly labeled with Caldwell Aerospace letterhead. Of course, Shaw Defense's bankruptcy wouldn't normally affect your company directly, Griffin, except for one small detail. She held up the document so the nearby cameras could capture it. 6 months ago, you signed a financial guarantee, $450 million, protecting Shaw Defense's loan in case of default. Griffin's legs went weak. He actually stumbled, would have fallen if Kinsley hadn't been gripping his arm. The guarantee. He had signed it 6 months ago at his mother's insistence, right when he started his affair with Kinsley. A gesture of good faith between business partners, the lawyers had said. A formality that would never be invoked, they had promised. Cassandra's voice was relentless, which means when Shaw Defense defaults, Caldwell Aerospace is on the hook for their debt. $450 million. Due within 90 days or you face foreclosure proceedings that would destroy your company, your father's legacy, and everything the Caldwell name represents. Lorraine made a sound like the air being knocked from her lungs. Around them, the social elite of New York were already recalibrating their relationships, their invitations, their partnerships. The Caldwell name, so prestigious an hour ago, was becoming toxic in real time. Griffin's voice came out desperate, pleading, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "What do you want, Cass? Money? Revenge? Just tell me what you want." Cassandra closed the portfolio with a sharp snap that echoed in the sudden quiet. "Revenge is a petty emotion, Griffin. This is business. But I admit there's a certain poetic justice to it." She stepped closer, close enough that the cameras couldn't capture their faces clearly. Her voice pitched for Griffin alone, though the crowd strained to hear. "For 5 years, you treated me like I was stupid, worthless, an embarrassment. You let your mother humiliate me at every opportunity. You cheated on me with this vapid child because she understood your world better than I did." Her eyes held his, and Griffin saw something in them he had never seen before. Something cold and calculating and utterly merciless. "But here's what you never understood, Griffin. I wasn't playing dumb. I was observing, learning, watching you make terrible business decisions and sign contracts without reading them properly, seeing exactly how weak you actually were beneath the expensive suits and family name." She straightened, her voice returning to normal volume, addressing the room again. "However, I'm not interested in destroying Caldwell Aerospace. Your father was kind to me the few times we met before he passed. For his sake, I'm willing to offer a way out." Hope flared in Griffin's eyes, desperate and pathetic. "Anything, please, Cass. My father built this company." Cassandra looked at August, who nodded once. She turned back to Griffin, and her smile was absolutely terrifying in its gentleness. "We play a game." Lorraine's voice cracked with disbelief. "This isn't kindergarten. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars." Cassandra ignored her, eyes locked on Griffin. "Chess. One game. You and me. Like we used to play on Sunday mornings, before you got too busy for your wife." The crowd leaned in, fascinated. This was better than any scripted drama, reality television at its most raw and compelling. Griffin's mind raced, trying to find the trap. "What are the stakes?" Cassandra's voice was clear and precise. "If you win, I forgive the guarantee. Caldwell Aerospace walks away clean. I restructure Shaw Defense without touching your company, and I leave New York. You never see me again." The offer seemed too good to be true, which meant it was. Griffin's throat felt tight. "And if you win?" Her smile was all predator now. No warmth, no mercy. "If I win, you resign as CEO of Caldwell Aerospace. The board seat goes to someone of my choosing. And Lorraine moves out of the Greenwich estate into a retirement community that I will select." Lorraine shrieked, actually shrieked, the sound undignified and desperate. "I will not live in some nursing home. That estate is my home. My husband built it." Cassandra's gaze shifted to Lorraine, cold and final. "Your husband left it to Griffin, and Griffin is about to lose it. The only question is whether you lose it now or after Caldwell Aerospace is foreclosed and liquidated." August Thorne reached into his jacket and produced a portable chess set, ivory and black obsidian, pieces that were themselves worth thousands of dollars. He placed it on a nearby table, and the crowd shifted to accommodate the space, forming a circle of spectators like Romans gathering for gladiatorial combat. Griffin stared at the board, his mind churning. He had been captain of the chess club at Wharton. He was good. Cassandra had always played confidently, but he had assumed he let her win sometimes to make her feel better. Looking back now, with everything he thought he knew revealed as illusion, he wasn't certain anymore. But what choice did he have? Refuse and face certain financial destruction? At least chess gave him a chance, however slim. August Thorne's voice cut through Griffin's paralysis. "Well, Mr. Caldwell, do you accept the wager, or shall we let the lawyers handle this by morning?" Griffin looked at his mother, whose face was rigid with fury and fear. He looked at Kinsley, whose engagement ring suddenly felt like an anchor rather than a promise. He looked at the 600 people watching him with expressions ranging from pity to schadenfreude to pure fascination. He pulled out a chair and sat. "I accept." Cassandra sat across from him, and the woman on the other side of the board bore no resemblance to the wife he thought he had known. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 5 years, watching and learning and preparing for exactly this moment. August stepped back, giving them space. The crowd pressed closer, phone cameras focused. This moment destined to be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Cassandra's voice was soft, almost kind. "White moves first, Griffin. Make your move." Griffin reached for his king's pawn, his hand steadier than he expected. This was familiar territory. Chess was logic and pattern recognition and planning. He could do this. He had to do this. He pushed the pawn to e4, the classic opening, aggressive and controlling. His voice came out with a hint of his old confidence. "Your move, Cass." She didn't hesitate. Her hand moved to her c-pawn, pushing it to c5. The Sicilian defense. Griffin's confidence flickered. Cassandra had always played the French defense when they played together, passive and reactive. The Sicilian was aggressive, asymmetric, the choice of someone who played to win rather than just avoid losing. He kept his expression neutral, developed his knight. She responded with her own development, pieces flowing onto the board with practiced ease. By the 10th move, Griffin felt the first stirrings of real concern. She wasn't playing like the Cassandra he remembered. Her moves were precise and purposeful, each piece positioned not just for immediate threats, but for long-term control. She was playing 3, 4, 5 moves ahead, seeing patterns he was only beginning to recognize. At move 15, she brought her queen out early, a move that looked like a mistake, amateur hour, the kind of error that should cost her the game. Griffin pounced, developing a fork that attacked both her queen and a bishop, a tactical opportunity too good to pass up. His voice held a hint of satisfaction. "You're exposed, Cass. You always forget to watch the diagonals." She looked up at him, and something in her eyes made his satisfaction curdle. "Do I?" She moved a pawn on the opposite side of the board, seemingly random, accomplishing nothing obvious. Griffin frowned but dismissed it. She was panicking, making moves without purpose. Lorraine's voice came from behind him, sharp and urgent. "Ignore that. Attack her queen. She's left it wide open." Griffin launched his attack, moving his knight to fork her queen and bishop. It was brutal, efficient, the kind of tactical strike that should win material and momentum. He expected panic. He expected the quick, defensive scramble of someone who had made a fatal error. Instead, Cassandra smiled. Her voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "Do you remember our 3rd anniversary, Griffin? That restaurant in Manhattan, the one your mother recommended?" Griffin's hand hovered over his pieces, confused by the non sequitur. "What? Why are you bringing that up now?" She moved her queen, not retreating but advancing deeper into his position, a move that looked suicidal. "You spent the entire dinner on your phone, emailing your assistant about the Boeing contract. You didn't speak to me once until dessert arrived." Griffin took her queen with his rook, relief flooding through him. "I was building our future, Cass." She reached across the board and took his bishop with a pawn he had forgotten existed, her voice hardening. "No, Griffin. You were building your future. I was an accessory, like your watch or your car, something to display but not actually engage with." The position had shifted while he was focused on her queen. Suddenly, his pieces looked scattered, uncoordinated, and that single pawn she had moved earlier, the one he had dismissed, was advancing with relentless purpose. Lorraine's voice behind him was getting frantic. "Stop her pawn. If it reaches the 8th rank, she can promote it to a queen. You have to stop it, now." Griffin saw it too, finally understood what she had been building toward. He brought his rook over to block the pawn's advance. Cassandra sacrificed her knight to clear the path. He moved his king to block directly. She brought a bishop from the shadows, forcing his king to move again. Each move, the pawn advanced. Each move, his position deteriorated. He had more pieces, better pieces, but they were tangled together, getting in each other's way, unable to coordinate effectively. Cassandra's voice cut through his growing panic. "You never asked about my grandfather, Griffin. In 5 years of marriage. You knew I was an orphan, knew I had been raised by a relative, but you never asked about my family history. You never asked about my education, or my interests, or what I did before waiting tables." She moved her rook, and the word came out quiet and final. Check. Griffin's king had only one square to move, forced to the edge of the board. His hands were shaking now, sweat running down his back despite the air conditioning. Cassandra continued, relentless. "You assumed I came from nothing because I asked for nothing. You assumed I was stupid because I stayed quiet when your mother insulted me. You assumed I was weak because I didn't fight back." She picked up the pawn, the single, humble piece that had been marching across the board while he focused on bigger threats. It sat on the 7th rank, one square away from transformation. Griffin stared at his position. His rook was pinned. His queen was on the wrong side of the board. His king was trapped against the edge with nowhere to run. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Don't." Cassandra pushed the pawn to the 8th rank. Promotion. August Thorne handed her a captured queen piece from the side of the table. She placed it on the board, and the position transformed from difficult to hopeless in a single move. Her voice carried across the silent room. "Checkmate." Griffin stared at the board, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. He traced possible moves, desperate for an escape that didn't exist. If he moved here, the new queen. If he moved there, the bishop. Every path led to the same conclusion. The king was dead. He slumped back in his chair, the sound of his defeat a wheeze of air leaving his lungs. Around them, 600 people erupted into conversation, some sympathetic, most merely fascinated by the spectacle of wealth and power and hubris meeting consequences. Griffin looked up at Cassandra and for the first time saw her clearly, without illusions or assumptions. "I lost." She stood, smoothing her dress with casual grace. "Yes, you did." Lorraine lurched forward, her composure completely shattered. "That doesn't count. She cheated. She distracted him with personal attacks." August Thorne's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "The game was fair, Mrs. Caldwell. Your son accepted the terms. The Thorne family always collects its debts." He gestured, and 2 men in charcoal suits appeared from the crowd, carrying briefcases embossed with a law firm logo that made several nearby attorneys audibly gasp. Sullivan and Cromwell, the most prestigious firm in New York, the lawyers who handled billion-dollar deals and represented presidents. The lead attorney opened his briefcase, began laying documents on the table, covering the chessboard in Griffin's demolished position. "The resignation papers are prepared, Mr. Caldwell. We simply need your signature." Griffin stared at the documents, at his name already typed in the relevant spaces, at the legal language that would strip him of his CEO position, his voting rights, his seat on the board. He would retain his shares, but they would be held in a blind trust controlled by Thorne Energy Corporation. He would be wealthy, but powerless, a passenger in a company his father had built. His hands shook as he picked up the pen. He looked at Cassandra one last time, searching for mercy or compassion, or any remnant of the woman he thought he had married. She looked back with eyes that held no warmth, no forgiveness, only the cold satisfaction of a chess player who had executed a perfect trap. "Sign them, Griffin, like I signed mine, quietly." He signed 3 documents, each one a nail in the coffin of his ambitions. The second attorney produced another set of papers, these addressed to Lorraine. "Regarding the Greenwich estate, Mrs. Caldwell, the property has been transferred to the trust as collateral for debt restructuring. You have 48 hours to vacate." Lorraine's face went purple. "I am not leaving. My husband built that house. I have rights." The attorney's voice was professionally neutral. Your husband left the property to your son. Your son has transferred it to the trust. As the trust managers, we have determined the estate requires renovation and repurposing. You have 48 hours. Cassandra spoke without looking at Lorraine. There's a very nice retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona. Desert Vista Senior Living. Beautiful facilities. Excellent activities. Far from Greenwich. Lorraine actually screamed, a sound of pure fury and impotence that made nearby guests step back. She grabbed Griffin's arm, shaking him. "Do something! She's evicting your mother!" Griffin peeled her fingers away gently, all fight gone from him. "I can't do anything, Mother. You wanted the merger. You wanted the social status. You wanted me to marry Kinsley. This is the price we're paying." Lorraine stared at him, betrayal and rage warring across her face. "I did it for you." Griffin's voice was dead, hollow. "No, Mother, you did it for you. And I let you. That's on me." The admission seemed to break something in Lorraine. She sank into a chair, finally silent, the magnitude of her loss settling over her like a shroud. Cassandra turned to address the room, her voice carrying to every corner. "Now, the matter of Caldwell Aerospace's new CEO." Griffin looked up, dread mixing with resignation. "Who? Some Thorn Energy executive who knows nothing about aerospace?" Cassandra's smile held a hint of genuine warmth for the first time that evening. "No, Griffin. Someone who knows Caldwell Aerospace better than you ever did. Someone who actually cared about the workers, the product, the ethics of the company. Someone you fired 3 years ago because he refused to cut corners on safety testing." The crowd near the entrance shifted, and a man walked through, late 30s, wearing an off-the-rack suit that looked quality but not extravagant, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of quiet competence that came from expertise rather than pedigree. Griffin's face went white as recognition hit. Silas Mercer. Silas Mercer had been Chief Technology Officer, the brilliant engineer who had been the soul of Caldwell Aerospace's innovation. Griffin had fired him to save 4% on the quarterly budget, replacing him with someone cheaper and less principled. Silas nodded to Cassandra, then looked at Griffin with an expression that held no anger, only professional assessment. "Griffin," Cassandra's voice was firm and final, "Silas is your new CEO, full operational control. He reports to the Thorn Energy Board, specifically to me. I've already reviewed the Shaw defense situation with him. We're canceling the toxic elements, refocusing on core aerospace innovation. We can save the jobs and the company reputation." Griffin found his voice, though it came out weak. "He's an engineer, not a businessman." Cassandra's response was sharp. "Exactly. That's why the company will survive, because he cares about what you build, not just what you sell." Silas addressed the room, his voice steady and authoritative. "First order of business is transparency. We'll be conducting a full audit of all contracts and partnerships. Any deals that compromise safety or ethics will be terminated, regardless of short-term profit impact. Caldwell Aerospace is going back to the principles Gerard Caldwell founded it on." The crowd murmured approval. Several Pentagon officials who had been edging toward the exits paused, reconsidering. A company with Thorn backing and Mercer's technical expertise was worth staying connected to. Cassandra turned to leave, signaling August. They had accomplished what they came for. The chess pieces were repositioned. The board was reset. Griffin and Lorraine were left in ruins, but Caldwell Aerospace would survive under better leadership. She made it 3 steps before Griffin's voice stopped her, broken and desperate. "Cass, wait." She paused but didn't turn. Griffin's words tumbled out, unfiltered. "I'm sorry, for all of it, for not defending you, for letting Mother treat you like garbage, for the affair, for being so blind I couldn't see who you actually were. I'm sorry." Cassandra turned slowly, and her expression held something complex, layered with hurt and anger, and a grief for what could have been. "I believe you're sorry, Griffin. I believe you finally understand what you lost. But sorry doesn't change 5 years of being invisible in my own marriage. Sorry doesn't erase the feeling of walking in on you with her. Sorry doesn't give me back the time I wasted trying to be small enough for you to love. She walked back to stand directly in front of him, close enough to see the tears forming in his eyes. You wanted to know if I'm happy with this outcome? If destroying your career brings me joy? The truth is, I feel nothing. You stopped being real to me the moment I found you in our bed. This isn't personal anymore. It's just cleaning up a mess I should have dealt with years ago. She turned to leave again, August waiting by the entrance. The crowd parted for them, phones still recording, this moment destined to be replayed and analyzed endlessly. Cassandra and August walked toward the exit, toward the tarmac and the waiting Gulf Stream, toward a future that no longer included Griffin Caldwell's weakness or Lorraine Caldwell's cruelty. They made it halfway across the venue before the sound of screeching tires outside made everyone turn. A black SUV, moving too fast, braked hard on the tarmac. Security personnel moved to intercept, but the driver emerged with hands raised, clearly not a threat, just urgent. The man who stepped out was tall and broad-shouldered, dark hair slightly disheveled, wearing a tuxedo like he had dressed in a hurry. He moved with the kind of controlled intensity that made people instinctively step aside, authority radiating from presence rather than announcement. He strode across the tarmac toward where Cassandra stood frozen, his eyes locked on her with an expression that combined relief and concern in something deeper, something that made the air between them crackle with history. Cassandra's voice came out barely above a whisper, shock evident for the first time all evening. Declan. Declan Hawthorne stopped 10 feet away, taking in the scene, the crowd, the cameras, the chessboard still visible on the table showing checkmate. His voice was deep and carried easily. Going somewhere, Cassandra Thorne? August's hand tightened slightly on his cane, protective. Hawthorne, what are you doing here? Declan ignored him, eyes only for Cassandra. I heard you destroyed Griffin Caldwell for breakfast. Impressive. But you're about to make a billion-dollar mistake if you sign those Shaw defense papers as currently structured. Cassandra's corporate mask slipped back into place, professional and controlled. I have lawyers who've reviewed every aspect of the acquisition. Declan pulled a tablet from his jacket, held it up. Not the Delaware shell companies, not the federal contracting violations hidden in subsidiary transactions. If you complete the acquisition without restructuring those elements first, you're buying criminal liability that could bring federal investigators to Thorne Energy's door. He stepped closer, voice dropping but still audible to nearby listeners. The clean version takes 3 weeks to structure. I can help you navigate it, but you need to know what you're walking into. Cassandra studied him, this man she had played chess with 7 years ago, this man who had been looking for her, this man who had somehow known exactly what she needed to hear to stop her from making a catastrophic error. Her voice was careful, controlled. How do you know all this? Declan's smile held an edge of self-deprecation. Because I was planning to buy Shaw Defense next week. You beat me to it. But I've done the due diligence, and I'm not going to let you walk into a trap just because I was too slow. August's voice held grudging respect. You're giving away leverage. Why? Declan's eyes never left Cassandra. Because I've been looking for her for 7 years. I'm not going to lose her now to a federal investigation that could have been avoided with proper planning. The crowd around them was silent, fascinated by this new development. This handsome stranger who had crashed a gala to save the woman who had just destroyed her ex-husband. Cassandra made a decision. Walk with me, Declan. You can brief me on the way to the aircraft. They moved toward the Gulf Stream, August trailing behind, Declan outlining the corporate restructuring necessary to isolate toxic liabilities while preserving valuable assets. Their conversation was technical, dense with financial terminology, but underneath it ran a current of something else, a connection that had survived 7 years of separation in different lives. At the base of the aircraft stairs, Cassandra paused. "Thank you for the warning. I'll have my lawyers implement your restructuring plan immediately." Declan pulled a business card from his pocket, held it out. Heavy black cardstock, gold lettering, simple and expensive. "Call me when the dust settles. We have 7 years to catch up on. And I still remember that draw in Vegas. I'd like a rematch." Cassandra took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. "I remember it too. You played the Rui Lopez like a classical master." His smile was genuine, warm. "And you played the Marshall attack like you were trying to set the board on fire. Most exciting game of my life." August cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Miss Thorne, we should be going." Cassandra nodded, but kept her eyes on Declan. "Dinner, next month, after Shaw Defense is properly restructured. Jackson Hole. I choose the restaurant." Declan's grin widened. "I'll bring my chess set." She turned and ascended the stairs, August following. At the top, she paused and looked back at the venue, at the crowd still visible through the windows, at Griffin slumped in his chair, surrounded by lawyers in ruin, at Lorraine crying into her hands, at Kinsley staring at an engagement ring that had lost all its meaning. She felt lighter. The weight of 5 years of pretending, of making herself small, of enduring humiliation and betrayal had lifted. She wasn't Cassandra Holloway anymore, the meek wife who served coffee and kept quiet. She wasn't even entirely Cassandra Thorne, the heir who had run away from responsibility and legacy. She was something new, forged from both identities, stronger for having broken and rebuilt herself. August's voice was soft beside her. "How do you feel, granddaughter?" She smiled, and it was real, unforced, the first genuine smile in longer than she could remember. "Like I can finally breathe." The Gulfstream door sealed shut, cutting off the noise and spectacle. The engine spooled up, and the aircraft began its taxi toward the runway. Through the window, Cassandra watched Manhattan fall away, lights glittering like a promise, or a warning, or simply a city where she had learned that silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Where she had learned that being underestimated was an advantage. Where she had learned that the quiet ones, the ones dismissed and overlooked, were often the most dangerous when they finally decided to play. Behind her, Griffin Caldwell was signing papers that dismantled his empire. Ahead, her real life was waiting, complex and challenging and entirely her own. The pawn had crossed the board, and queens, once crowned, didn't retreat. 6 months after the Empire Gala, the transformation of Caldwell Aerospace was complete enough to measure in quarterly reports and employee satisfaction surveys. The stock price had climbed 38% from its post-Gala collapse. 3 major contracts had been secured with NASA and the Department of Defense. Workplace morale, according to independent assessment, had reached its highest point in a decade. Silas Mercer stood at the head of the conference table in the refurbished Stamford headquarters, presenting to a board that now included 3 Thorne Energy representatives. His presentation was technical, dense with engineering specifications and safety protocols, the language of someone who understood that aerospace was about precision and lives rather than quarterly earnings and stock manipulation. Cassandra sat at the far end of the table, listening with the focused attention she brought to everything now. She wore a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a style that managed to be both professional and elegant. The sapphire necklace was locked in a vault in Montana. This version of herself didn't need $15 million of jewelry to command respect. Silas clicked to his final slide. The European Consortium contract is projected to generate $1.8 billion over 5 years. More importantly, it positions us as the primary supplier for next-generation satellite deployment systems. This is the kind of innovation Gerard Caldwell would have been proud of. August Thorne, participating via video conference from the ranch, nodded his approval. "Excellent work, Mr. Mercer. The board votes to approve the consortium partnership. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. Cassandra watched the other board members, saw the respect they showed Silas, the engagement they brought to discussions about engineering challenges and safety standards. This was what leadership looked like when it was based on competence rather than inheritance, on substance rather than surname. After the meeting ended, Silas approached her with a tablet displaying quarterly projections. We're ahead of schedule on the restructuring. The toxic elements from the Shaw acquisition have been isolated and liquidated without contaminating the core business. Your lawyers knew what they were doing. Cassandra allowed herself a small smile. Declan Hawthorne's recommendations were very precise. He has a talent for seeing hidden structural problems. Silas's expression shifted slightly, something knowing in his eyes. I heard you've been seeing quite a bit of Mr. Hawthorne. Dinner in Jackson Hole turned into weekends in Aspen, if the business press is accurate. Heat touched Cassandra's cheeks, surprising her. She wasn't used to being the subject of gossip, even friendly speculation. We're exploring whether a professional relationship might have personal dimensions worth investigating. Silas laughed, genuine and warm. That's the most corporate way I've ever heard someone describe dating. For what it's worth, he seems like a good man. And you deserve good things, Miss Thorne. The sentiment landed with unexpected weight. Cassandra had spent 6 months rebuilding her professional identity, restructuring Shaw Defense, managing Thorne Energy's expansion into renewable infrastructure. She had spent almost no time considering whether she deserved happiness beyond the satisfaction of competence and accomplishment. Her phone vibrated with a text from Declan. Landed at Teterboro. Still good for dinner at 8? She typed back quickly. Snake River Grill. Don't be late. Silas caught the smile that flickered across her face. Go. The board meeting's done. The company won't collapse if you take an evening off. She stood, gathering her materials. Call if anything urgent develops. Otherwise, I'll see you at next month's review. Snake River Grill occupied a prime location in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, far enough from New York and Montana to feel like neutral territory. The restaurant specialized in game meats and local ingredients. Its atmosphere equal parts rustic Western and refined cuisine. Cassandra arrived first, was shown to a private corner table where conversations couldn't be overheard by curious diners or ambitious reporters. Declan arrived exactly at 8, wearing dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, his concession to Wyoming casual that still managed to look expensive. He moved through the restaurant with the confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, drawing eyes but not seeming to notice or care. He slid into the seat across from her, his smile immediate and genuine. You look like you've had a long day. She accepted the observation without defensiveness. Board meeting in Stamford, followed by conference calls with renewable energy contractors in Colorado. Long, but productive. You? His expression shifted to wry amusement. Spent the morning convincing a manufacturing CEO that his company is worth saving, despite catastrophic debt ratios. Spent the afternoon redesigning his capital structure to actually make that true. Also long, also productive. The waiter appeared, took drink orders, disappeared with professional discretion. Cassandra studied Declan across the table, this man who had somehow become important without her quite noticing the transition from professional contact to something more personal. He met her gaze steadily. You're thinking very hard about something. Want to share, or should I guess? She chose honesty over deflection. I'm thinking that 6 months ago, I destroyed my ex-husband's career in front of 600 people. I've restructured 3 companies, fired 24 executives, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But sitting here with you feels more dangerous than any of that. Declan leaned back, considering her words carefully. Dangerous how? She struggled to articulate something she barely understood herself. Business is logical. Outcomes are measurable. Success and failure have definitions. This, she gestured between them, this doesn't have rules or metrics or predictable results. I don't know how to evaluate risk when I can't quantify variables. His laugh was soft, understanding. You're trying to run a relationship like a merger negotiation. It doesn't work that way, Cassandra. The use of her first name, casual and familiar, sent something warm through her chest. Then how does it work? He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers, offering contact but not demanding it. You decide whether being with someone makes you better or worse, whether you're more yourself or less, whether the risk of being hurt is worth the possibility of being happy. She placed her hand in his, felt calluses from work and warmth from life. I don't have a good track record with that calculation. His fingers closed around hers gently. Griffin Caldwell was an idiot who couldn't see what he had. I'm not Griffin, and you're not the woman who waited tables in Oregon, pretending to be someone smaller than you are. We're both exactly who we appear to be. That's either going to work or it won't, but at least it'll be honest. Over dinner, Declan told her about growing up in Detroit, watching his father get destroyed by corporate indifference. She told him about the isolation of growing up as an heiress, where every friendship felt transactional. By dessert, they were laughing about a disastrous chess tournament in college where Declan had fallen asleep during a critical match. When the check came, Declan reached for it automatically. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. I believe I said I was choosing the restaurant. That implies I'm paying. He grinned. You're worth approximately $75 billion. I'm worth maybe $5 billion on a good day. Let me maintain the illusion of traditional courtesy. She let him have it, recognizing the gesture for what it was. Not about money, but about wanting to give her something, however symbolic. Outside, the Wyoming night was crisp and clear, stars visible in quantities impossible in cities. They walked along the main street, not touching but close enough to share warmth. Declan's voice was quiet, thoughtful. I have a confession to make. Cassandra felt tension spike. Should I be worried? He stopped walking, turned to face her, his expression serious in the streetlight. I didn't just happen to show up at the Empire Gala. I'd been tracking you for weeks, ever since you called asking about Shaw Defense. When I realized what you were planning, I knew you'd need the Delaware information to avoid the federal trap. I crashed the event specifically to warn you. She processed this, examining it for red flags or manipulation. Why? His answer was simple, direct. Because 7 years ago, I played the best chess match of my life against someone who saw the board differently than anyone I'd ever faced. That person disappeared, and I spent years wondering what happened to her. When you called, I realized you'd been hiding in plain sight, surviving a marriage that tried to make you invisible. I wasn't going to let legal complications destroy what you'd built. Cassandra felt something crack open in her chest, some defensive wall she hadn't realized she was still maintaining. That's either very romantic or slightly stalker-adjacent. He laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet street. I prefer to think of it as persistent interest in a worthy opponent, but I can see how the interpretation might vary. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them, her voice dropping. I don't know how to do this, Declan. The last time I trusted someone with my real self, he treated me like an embarrassment and cheated on me with someone who understood his world better. Declan's hand came up, fingers gentle against her cheek. I don't want you to fit into my world, Cassandra. I want to build something new with you, where we're both exactly who we are. No hiding, no pretending, no one making themselves smaller. She kissed him then, there on the main street of Jackson Hole under Wyoming stars, and it felt like the first honest thing she had done in years. Not strategic, not calculated, just wanting something and taking it. Consequences unknown and risks accepted. When they finally separated, both breathing slightly harder, Declan's smile was both satisfied and wondering. I've been wanting to do that since Vegas, she laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. You should have. Would have saved us both some time. His voice was rough when he spoke again. I'm flying back to New York tomorrow for meetings. Come with me. Spend the weekend. No business, no boards, just us, figuring out if this is something worth building. Her answer surprised her with its certainty. Yes. The weekend in New York became a revelation in small moments. Saturday morning brunch in a cafe in Brooklyn where nobody recognized them, and the coffee was terrible, but the conversation was fascinating. An afternoon at the Museum of Modern Art where Declan revealed unexpected knowledge of abstract expressionism. Dinner at a Thai restaurant that seated 12 people and served food that made her forget every fancy meal she had endured in Connecticut. Sunday, they stayed in Declan's Tribeca loft, playing chess and talking and slowly, carefully learning each other's patterns. Between games, they discussed families and losses and the weight of expectation, loneliness and ambition, and the strange isolation of being powerful. As sunset painted the loft windows gold and orange, Cassandra found herself on Declan's couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, feeling more at peace than she had felt since before she married Griffin. Declan's voice rumbled through his chest. "I'm falling in love with you. Have been since that phone call 6 months ago. Probably was 7 years ago in Vegas, but didn't have the emotional intelligence to recognize it. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out, but I'm not interested in pretending I feel less than I do." Cassandra's breath caught. The declaration should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like relief. Her response came without hesitation. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, and I have no idea what to do with that information, because my last attempt at love resulted in public humiliation and strategic revenge. But I'm willing to find out if we can build something better." He kissed her forehead, gentle and certain. "That's all we need. Willingness to try. The rest we'll figure out together." 3 weeks later, Cassandra stood in her grandfather's library at the ranch, looking at the chessboard that was always set up. August sat in his customary chair, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, studying her with patient attention. His voice was gentle, understanding. "You're going to tell me you want to step back from day-to-day operations at Thorn Energy." She wasn't surprised he had anticipated her. "Not step back entirely, but I want to restructure my role. Hire a president to handle operations. Keep my board seat and major strategic decisions, but stop trying to run the company from hotel rooms and conference calls." August sipped his whiskey, considering. "Because of the Hawthorne boy?" She bristled slightly at the diminutive. "Declan is 36 years old and runs a successful corporate restructuring firm. Hardly a boy." August's smile was knowing. "Fair point. Because of Declan, then. And because you're tired of living out of suitcases, trying to be everywhere at once." She sank into the chair across from him. "I've spent 6 months proving I can run this empire, proving I'm worthy of the Thorn name. But I'm exhausted, Grandpa, and I'm starting to wonder if proving something is the same as actually living." August was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience and hard-won wisdom. "Your grandmother and I built this company together. 50 years of partnership, personal and professional. Best decision I ever made was recognizing that the empire mattered less than the person I was building it with." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and clear. "You've proven yourself 10 times over, Cassandra. Nobody questions whether you're a Thorn anymore. The question now is what kind of life you want to live." She felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I want to build something with Declan. I want to stop running from state to state, pretending I can be in 3 places at once. I want to actually sleep in my own bed more than twice a month." August raised his glass in a toast. "Then hire the president, delegate the operations, keep the strategy and the board seat. Live your life, granddaughter. The empire will survive without you micromanaging every detail." Relief washed her, permission granted from the only person whose opinion truly mattered. "Thank you, Grandpa." His smile was fierce and proud. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for being smart enough to know the difference between dedication and self-destruction. Now go call that young man and tell him you're staying in New York." She did exactly that. Standing on the ranch house porch, Looking out at the mountains that would always be home, she called Declan and told him she was restructuring her life to make room for possibility. His response was characteristically direct. "Move in with me. The loft has plenty of space. We can figure out logistics later, but I want to wake up next to you more than twice a month." The offer was terrifying and perfect in equal measure. "I'll need a home office and a proper chessboard, and we should probably have a conversation about long-term expectations." Declan's laugh carried warmth and affection. "We can have that conversation. But Cassandra, I already know where I want this to go. The only question is whether you're ready to build something that isn't about strategy or revenge or proving yourself. Something that's just about being happy." She thought about 5 years of making herself small, about 3 weeks of devastating revenge, about 6 months of rebuilding an empire, about the difference between winning and actually living. Her answer was certain. "I'm ready." 1 year after the Empire Gala, Cassandra received an invitation that made her pause with her morning coffee halfway to her lips. Heavy cardstock, expensive printing, formal language requesting her presence at Griffin Caldwell's wedding. Not to Kinsley Shaw, whose engagement had imploded along with her father's company, to someone named Marlo Porter, a second-grade teacher from Stanford, with no social media presence and apparently zero connection to Connecticut society. Declan, reading over her shoulder from where he stood behind her chair in the loft's kitchen, made an interested sound. "Are you going?" Cassandra set down the invitation. A year ago, she would have felt triumph or satisfaction. Now she felt mostly curiosity mixed with a surprising thread of hope. She pulled out her phone, typed a message to a number she hadn't used in months. "Congratulations on your engagement. I hope she makes you happy." Griffin's response came back within minutes. "Thank you. She does. She makes me want to be better than I was. I'm teaching chess to kids now, volunteering at the community center, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to live up to impossible standards." Cassandra showed the message to Declan, who read it with a thoughtful expression. "Sounds like he's actually growing. Do you want to see him?" She considered it. The invitation included a note in Griffin's handwriting, asking if she would be willing to meet him for coffee before the wedding. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation. Her response was measured. "I'll meet you. Once. Public place. 1 hour." They chose a Starbucks in Stamford, neutral and anonymous. Griffin arrived first, looking different than she remembered. He wore jeans and a sweater, his hair slightly too long, his posture less rigid. He looked like someone who had stopped performing and started existing. He stood when she entered. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." She sat across from him, accepted the coffee he had already ordered. "I was curious what you wanted to say after a year." Griffin's hands wrapped around his own cup. "I wanted to apologize. Actually apologize, not the performance I gave at the gala. I treated you terribly. I let my mother destroy something good because I was too weak to stand up for what mattered. You deserved better." Cassandra studied him, looking for manipulation or self-serving justification. She found only exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. "Why now?" He smiled, self-deprecating. "Because 6 months ago I was still angry. Therapy helped. So did Marlo, who pointed out that being bitter about consequences I earned was pathetic." Despite herself, Cassandra felt curiosity. "Tell me about her." Griffin's expression transformed, something genuine and warm replacing the careful neutrality. "She's a teacher, 2nd grade. She doesn't care that I used to be CEO of an aerospace company. She cares that I show up on time to help with her classroom projects, and that I'm patient with kids struggling with math. She makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves her." Cassandra sipped her coffee. "I'm glad you found someone who makes you better." He met her eyes and she saw sincerity there, hard-won and painful. "I heard you're with Declan Hawthorne, that you're happy." She nodded. "I am. He challenges me and supports me and never asks me to be smaller than I am. Griffin's smile was bittersweet. That's what I should have given you. I'm sorry I didn't. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who had once promised forever, now separated by choices and consequences. Cassandra found herself speaking a truth she hadn't planned to share. I forgive you, Griffin. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. But because holding on to anger takes energy I'd rather spend building something good. Relief washed over Griffin's face. Thank you. That means more than you know. She stood, ready to leave this chapter finally closed. I won't be coming to your wedding. It would be awkward for everyone. But I hope you and Marlo build something real and honest. Griffin stood as well, offered his hand. I hope you and Declan build something extraordinary. You deserve extraordinary, Cassandra Thorne. She shook his hand, felt the finality of it. Goodbye, Griffin. Be happy. Actually, be happy. She walked out into Connecticut autumn, leaves turning gold and red. Her phone showed a text from Declan. How did it go? She typed back as she walked to her car. Better than expected. He's different. I think he might actually make it. Declan's response was immediate. Good. Now come home. I'm making dinner and I found a chess problem I want your opinion on. Home. The words settled in her chest with warmth and certainty. Not the ranch in Montana, though that would always be part of her. Not the Greenwich estate she had never really inhabited. Home was a Tribeca loft with a man who saw her completely and loved what he saw. When she walked into the loft that evening, Declan was in the kitchen, actual cooking happening despite his protestations of culinary incompetence. He looked up when she entered, his smile immediate and welcoming. He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. You okay? She kissed him, long and deep and full of certainty. Better than okay. I'm free. Actually free, not just legally divorced, but emotionally done. I don't have to carry anger anymore. Declan pulled back enough to study her face. That's growth. I'm proud of you. She laughed. Don't be too proud. I'm still competitive enough to destroy you at chess after dinner. His grin was pure challenge. We'll see about that. I've been studying Sicilian defense variations specifically to counter your favorite lines. They spent the evening exactly as she wanted. Dinner that was slightly overcooked, but made with care. Chess games that went late, each of them winning and losing in equal measure. Conversation that ranged from business strategy to childhood memories to plans for a future they were building together. As midnight approached, they stood on the loft's balcony, looking out at Manhattan lights. Declan pulled a small box from his pocket, and Cassandra's breath caught. The box was the wrong size for a ring, which brought relief and disappointment in confusing combination. She opened it to find a chess piece, a queen carved from Montana Yogo sapphire, the blue stone catching city lights and transforming them into something magical. Declan's voice was quiet, meaningful. You told Griffin that pawns become queens when they reach the other side of the board. I wanted you to have a reminder that the game is over. You've already won. You're already exactly who you're supposed to be. Cassandra felt tears on her cheeks. This is the most romantic thing anyone's ever given me. He kissed her gently. Get used to it. I plan to spend the rest of our lives reminding you that you're extraordinary. She held the sapphire queen in her hand, feeling its weight and symbolism. Once she had been Cassandra Thorne, hiding from legacy. Then Cassandra Holloway, pretending to be small enough to be loved. Then Cassandra Thorne again, wielding power like a weapon. Now she was simply Cassandra, powerful and vulnerable, strategic and emotionally open. CEO and partner and woman who didn't have to choose between her contradictions. She looked at Declan, this man who had searched for her for 7 years, who had crashed a gala to save her from disaster, who had challenged her to build something real. Her voice was certain, clear, full of future. I love you. Not strategically, not because it makes sense on paper, just because being with you makes me more myself than I've ever been. His response was immediate and fierce. I love you too, and I'm never going to ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. They stood wrapped in each other in the New York night, two people who had learned the hard way that real strength wasn't about winning every battle. It was about knowing which battles mattered and which were just noise. Somewhere in Connecticut, Griffin Caldwell was planning a wedding to a woman who made him better. Somewhere in Arizona, Lorraine Caldwell was learning to live with reduced circumstances. Somewhere in Stamford, Silas Mercer was running an aerospace company with integrity. And here in Manhattan, Cassandra Thorne held a sapphire queen in the hand of a man who loved her. She had played the game perfectly. She had executed her strategy flawlessly. She had proven every doubter wrong and made every enemy regret underestimating her. But the real victory wasn't any of that. The real victory was standing on this balcony, holding this gift, planning a future that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication or proving herself worthy. The real victory was learning that power meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. That winning meant nothing if the prize was just more loneliness. She had signed those divorce papers in silence, letting them believe she was broken. She had stepped off that plane at the Gala, showing them exactly how wrong they were. She had played chess like a master, proving that being underestimated was the ultimate advantage. And now, finally, she understood the difference between conquest and contentment, between domination and peace, between winning the game and actually living the life you wanted. Cassandra Thorne didn't need to play anymore. She had already won everything that mattered, not by destroying her enemies, though she had done that efficiently and thoroughly, but by building something so good, so genuine, so completely hers that their opinions became irrelevant, their judgments meaningless, their world something she no longer needed or wanted any part of. She looked at the sapphire queen in her hand one more time, then set it on the balcony railing. The piece caught the city lights, glowing with inner fire, beautiful and complete, just like her.